I received a text message from my son asking for money. I almost did, until the next call revealed the truth about his wife. But that moment when I saw those 3 dots blinking on my phone screen, when I was ready to empty my savings account for him, that was the moment I realized I had become nothing more than a bank account with a heartbeat. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Eleanor, and I'm 73 years old. Every morning in my small Brooklyn apartment feels like climbing a mountain with invisible weights strapped to my shoulders. The smell of old coffee lingers on the chipped kitchen counter as I shuffle through bills and unfinished crossword puzzles, my arthritic fingers struggling with the pen. My days blur between long bouts of silence and the hum of distant traffic on Fifth Avenue, a constant reminder that life goes on outside these 4 walls, but rarely includes me anymore. This routine has become exhausting, filled with an ache that no medication can fix. It's the ache of being forgotten by the people you love most. The ache of realizing that your phone only rings when someone needs something from you. That particular Tuesday morning started like any other. I expected maybe a call from my daughter Sarah, though those had become rare. Perhaps a visit from my grandchildren, though that felt more like wishful thinking. Maybe just a simple, "How are you, Mom?" from someone, anyone. Instead, at exactly 10:30 in the morning, a message glowed from my phone screen. The contact name read, Michael, my son. But something felt wrong from the very first word. "Mom, I'm in serious trouble. I need money right now. Can't explain over text. Please transfer what you can to my account. It's urgent." My heart fluttered with that familiar cocktail of hope and dread. Hope, because maybe my son still needed me. Dread, because deep down, I knew this wasn't right. The words felt cold, distant, nothing like the Michael who used to call me every Sunday just to hear my voice. I stared at that message for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Memories played behind my closed eyelids like an old movie reel. Pictures of his first steps across this very living room, the smell of his baby shampoo still lingering in my memory, his laughter filling every corner of this apartment when he was young and still believed his mother could fix anything. But reality has a way of snapping you back, like a chilly gust through a broken window. The last invitation to family dinner, once my sacred Sunday ritual, had been canceled without explanation 3 months ago. The silence afterward screamed louder than any argument ever could. And now this message, demanding money, felt like salt rubbing into an already raw wound. Was I just an ATM to my own flesh and blood? Had I become nothing more than a convenient source of emergency funds? These questions haunted me as I held that phone with trembling hands. Let me tell you about my history with this family, because to understand what happened next, you need to know how deep my sacrifices ran. I think back on all the years I poured myself into these relationships, like a fountain that never stopped running, even when it was bone dry. When Michael was just 7 years old, his father left us. Just walked out one Tuesday morning with a suitcase and a promise to send money that never came. I was 32, working double shifts at a Brooklyn diner while trying to raise 2 children in a neighborhood where gunshots were more common than lullabies. I remember those nights when Michael would cry because the other kids had fathers at their baseball games, and I would hold him close, promising that we'd be okay, that love could fill any gap. I gave him my warmth, my time, my hope. I scrimped on lunch money to buy him new shoes when his grew too small. I worked Christmas Eve every year so I could afford presents that would make him smile. "Mom, I just need a little help," became his most frequent phrase as he grew older. Whether it was college tuition, his first apartment deposit, or help with his wedding expenses, my answer was always yes. My savings account became a revolving door of his emergencies. The cold silence that followed each financial rescue was deafening. No thank you calls, no check-ins afterward, no acknowledgement that I had just given him another piece of my security. My daughter Sarah would snap at me during those years. You always take his side. You always give him everything while the rest of us get nothing. The house would fill with a tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. But I couldn't help myself. Michael was my baby, my boy who needed protecting. But were these really protections? Or was I enabling something much darker? My private doubts started creeping in during the quiet hours. 3 in the morning became my enemy, when sleep wouldn't come and questions multiplied like shadows on the wall. Was my love being used? Was I giving everything to someone who saw me as nothing more than a convenient bank account? The signs were there, looking back. Birthday greetings that came 3 days late, if at all. Last year, when my arthritis flared so badly I couldn't dress myself properly. When the pain in my joints felt like shards of glass grinding together, none of my children called. I spent 4 days in the hospital, and the only person who visited was Mrs. Rivera from next door, bringing homemade soup and genuine concern. The hospital nurse, a young woman named Patricia with kind eyes, showed me more warmth in those 4 days than my own family had in months. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, adjusting my pillow with gentle hands, "family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up when you need them most." Those words stayed with me long after I returned to my empty apartment, but the real shock was still coming. 3 weeks after that hospital stay, while I was still moving carefully and taking medication for the inflammation, I overheard something that changed everything. I was coming back from the corner store, my shopping cart squeaking as I navigated the cracked sidewalk, when I heard voices from Mrs. Rodriguez's stoop. My son's wife, Jessica, was there visiting with her friend, their conversation floating through the warm afternoon air. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but sound carries in Brooklyn neighborhoods, and some things demand to be heard. "You should see Michael's new car," Jessica was saying, her voice filled with pride and something else, something that made my stomach clench. "Completely paid for in cash. No monthly payments, no nothing." "How did you guys manage that?" her friend asked. Jessica's laugh was sharp, almost cruel. "His mother. She's always good for a few thousand when we need it. I just tell Michael to text her some emergency and boom, money in the account within the hour. It's like having our own personal ATM." The ceramic mug I was holding slipped from my fingers and shattered on the pavement, pieces scattering like my trust, like my faith in the family I had sacrificed everything for. The crash was loud enough that both women looked in my direction, but I was frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe properly. Jessica's eyes met mine for just a moment, and instead of shame or guilt, I saw defiance. She knew I had heard, and she didn't care. Tears slipped quietly down my cheeks as I gathered the broken pieces of my mug, each shard a reflection of how broken I felt inside. The dim light of that afternoon seemed to match the darkness growing in my heart. For the first time in my 73 years, I felt truly invisible. Not Michael's loving mother, not Sarah's supportive parent, just a means to an end. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Have you ever wondered if the people you love most see you as a person or just as what you can provide for them? That night, alone in my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table and did something I had never done before. I calculated how much money I had given my children over the years. The number was staggering. Enough to buy a small house, enough to retire comfortably, enough to ensure my golden years weren't spent worrying about every grocery bill. Instead, here I was at 73, living in a one-bedroom apartment with a leaky faucet I couldn't afford to fix, eating store-brand everything, and wearing sweaters with holes I darned myself because buying new ones seemed too expensive. For the first time in my life, I dreamed of saying no. But the walls of fear closed in immediately. Fear of loneliness, fear of losing what little connection I had left with my children, fear of growing old completely alone. The war between my need for respect and my terror of abandonment raged in my chest like a physical pain. I spent that entire night packing away photographs of better times, when the smiles were real and the love felt unconditional. Each picture I placed in the storage box was like closing a chapter of my life. I stared into the bathroom mirror at 3 a.m. and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. When had I become so small? When had I learned to make myself invisible to avoid conflict? But something was changing inside me, even if I couldn't name it yet. When I finally confronted my son, 3 days after overhearing Jessica's confession, his reaction was like being slapped by someone wearing brass knuckles. I had practiced what I would say, rehearsed it in the mirror, but nothing prepared me for the reality of that conversation. "Michael," I said when he answered his phone, "we need to talk about the money." His voice immediately became defensive, sharp. "What about it, Mom? I always pay you back." "Do you?" I asked quietly. "Because I've been keeping track, and there's quite a bit you've borrowed that never came back." The silence stretched between us like a canyon. When he finally spoke, his tone was cold, calculated. "You don't understand the pressure Jessica and I are under. You don't know what it's like trying to make ends meet in this economy." "I know exactly what it's like," I replied, feeling my voice grow steadier. "I've been doing it for 73 years. That's when he said something that cut deeper than any knife ever could. "Look, Mom, if you can't help us anymore, just say so. We'll figure it out. We don't need your guilt trips." Guilt trips? For wanting acknowledgement of my sacrifices? For asking where 40 years of unconditional love had gone? My husband Frank, who had been my rock during our 25 years of marriage before his stroke left him confused and distant, withdrew even further into his newspaper fortress. The few words he managed now were mostly about the weather or asking for his medication. The man who once held me through every crisis now seemed to exist in a world where I was just another caregiver. My daughter Sarah's reaction was perhaps the most painful of all. When I tried to explain what I had overheard, her response was swift and brutal. "Mom, you're being paranoid. Jessica wouldn't say something like that. And even if she did, so what? You've got money sitting in the bank doing nothing. At least this way it's helping family. If you don't help them," she continued, her voice taking on that manipulative edge I remembered from her teenage years, "don't expect us around for holidays anymore. We can't deal with family drama right now." Family drama? I was the drama for wanting to be treated like a human being instead of a cash dispenser? But then, in my darkest hour, light came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Rivera, my quiet Puerto Rican neighbor with eyes that held decades of storms, knocked on my door one evening with a plate of homemade pastels and a story that would change everything. "Eleanor," she said in her gentle accent, settling into my worn kitchen chair, "I heard you crying through the walls last night. I know that sound. I know what it means when family breaks your heart." She told me about her own children, how they had drained her savings account and then disappeared when the money ran out. How she had learned at age 68 that love without respect isn't love at all. It's exploitation disguised as family obligation. "You know what I learned?" she asked, her weathered hands holding mine across my kitchen table. "I learned that sometimes you have to lose your children to save yourself. Sometimes you have to say no to someone you love, even if it makes them hate you for a while." Her words planted a seed that would grow into the strength I needed for what came next. One chilly morning in October, autumn air carrying the promise of change through my apartment windows, I did something I had never done in my entire life. When my phone buzzed with another emergency text from Michael, this time needing money for what he claimed was a medical bill, I replied with a single word: "No." My hands shook as I typed those 2 letters. N-O. Such a small word, but it felt like I was moving mountains. His response was immediate and explosive. Phone calls, text messages, increasingly desperate and then increasingly angry. "What's wrong with you? Since when do you not help your own son? Jessica was right about you getting selfish in your old age." But I remained firm. For the first time in my adult life, I said no and meant it. That afternoon, I walked to the office of a lawyer Mrs. Rivera had recommended, a patient woman named Ms. Chen who specialized in elder law. My arthritis made the 6-block walk challenging, but every step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had thought was lost forever. Mrs. Thompson, Ms. Chen said, reviewing the documents I had brought, "You need to protect yourself. What your family has been doing, this pattern of emotional manipulation combined with financial exploitation, it's more common than you might think." She helped me set up a new bank account, one that only I could access. She drafted a power of attorney document that would protect my assets from being drained by family members. Most importantly, she gave me language to use, ways to set boundaries that were firm but not cruel. "Remember," she told me as I prepared to leave her office, "saying no to someone else's demands is saying yes to your own well-being." That night, for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. The Brooklyn dawn came gentle through my bedroom window, washing away the weight that had been crushing my chest for so long. I woke up and realized that the constant knot of anxiety in my stomach was gone. Have you ever experienced that feeling when you finally stop carrying someone else's problems and start focusing on your own life? It's terrifying and liberating all at once, but my family wasn't finished with me yet. 2 weeks after I started saying no to their financial requests, they demanded a family meeting. Sarah arranged a Zoom call, insisting that everyone needed to talk. Frank, despite his limitations, was propped up in his chair beside me. Michael and Jessica appeared on screen from their living room, a living room that I now noticed had expensive furniture and decorations that my money had probably paid for. "Mom," Sarah began, her voice taking on that fake sweet tone she used when she wanted something. "Michael told me you've been acting strange lately, refusing to help when family needs you. That's not like you." I looked at their faces on the screen, my children, the people I had given everything to, and I saw something I had been blind to for years. I saw entitlement. I saw manipulation. I saw people who had never learned to take care of themselves, because I had always been there to catch them when they fell. That's when I did something that surprised even me. I reached for the framed photograph sitting on the table next to my computer, a picture of all of us at Coney Island from 5 years ago, when I still believed we were a happy family. Without saying a word, I tore it in half, right down the middle, separating myself from the rest of them. The sound of the photograph tearing was like thunder in the silence of that video call. "I will no longer buy love," I said, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill from my eyes. "I will no longer pay people to pretend they care about me, respect me, or lose me." Their silence was deafening. Michael's mouth hung open. Jessica looked away from the camera. Sarah started to speak, then stopped. "But Mom," Michael finally stammered, "we do care about you. We love you." "Then show me," I replied. "Show me by calling when you don't need money. Show me by visiting when there's no emergency. Show me by treating me like a person instead of a bank account." And I closed the laptop before they could respond. For weeks afterward, my phone was silent. No calls, no texts, no demands for emergency funds. The silence was both painful and peaceful. I had finally drawn my boundary lines, and now I was learning to live within them. But my family had one more surprise for me, one final test of my newfound strength. 6 weeks after our confrontation, I was tagged in a video posted to our extended family's Facebook group. Jessica had made what appeared to be an emotional apology video, complete with tears and dramatic pauses. But as I watched, horror growing in my chest, I realized what she was actually doing. She was painting me as the villain. "I just want everyone to know," she said to the camera, her voice quavering with what seemed like genuine emotion, "how hurt Michael and I are by his mother's recent behavior. We tried to include her in our lives, tried to maintain a relationship, but she's become increasingly bitter and demanding." She went on to twist every interaction we'd had, taking my requests for basic respect and presenting them as unreasonable demands. She shared screenshots of text messages, but they were carefully cropped to remove context, making my words seem harsh and cold. "We're worried about her mental state," Jessica continued. "This sudden personality change, the paranoia, the accusations. We think she might need professional help, but she won't listen to us." The comments from relatives began immediately. Cousins I hadn't seen in years expressing their concern for my deteriorating condition. Aunts and uncles suggesting that maybe I should consider assisted living if I was becoming difficult to deal with. My first instinct was panic. My second was rage. My third was the urge to defend myself, to explain, to justify my actions to people who had never been there during my darkest moments. But then something remarkable happened. I remembered Ms. Chen's words. "Other people's opinions of you are none of your business." I read through every comment, watched the video 3 more times, and then did something that surprised even me. I closed my laptop and made myself a cup of tea. I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. I didn't try to set the record straight. My calm was armor. My silence was a roar, because I had learned something crucial. People who truly know you don't need explanations, and people who don't know you won't believe your explanations anyway. This final manipulation attempt actually confirmed something beautiful. My transformation was real. The old Eleanor would have spent sleepless nights crafting the perfect response, would have called everyone individually to explain her side of the story, would have bent herself into pretzels trying to make people understand. The new Eleanor made tea and watched the sunset from her kitchen window. Do you know what real strength looks like? It looks like not needing to prove you're right to people who have already decided you're wrong. 3 months later, on a Tuesday morning that felt lighter than any Tuesday in years, I took a bus to Queens. I had seen a flyer for pottery classes at the community center, and for the first time in decades, I decided to do something purely for the joy of it. The classroom smelled like clay and creativity. My hands, arthritic and spotted with age, proved surprisingly adept at shaping the spinning earth on the wheel. The instructor, a woman about my age named Dorothy, welcomed me with genuine warmth. "First time?" she asked, and when I nodded, she smiled. "Oh, honey, you're in for such a treat. There's something magical about creating something beautiful with your own hands." She was right. As I centered that first ball of clay, feeling it yield and respond to my touch, something inside me remembered what it felt like to create instead of simply give away pieces of myself. I signed up for the full 8-week course that very day. Back in my apartment, I began making changes that reflected this new chapter of my life. I bought bright yellow curtains to replace the faded beige ones that had hung in my windows for 15 years. Mrs. Rivera gifted me 3 small plants, a rubber tree, a peace lily, and something called a prayer plant that folded its leaves at night as if in meditation. I donated clothes that carried the weight of sad memories and bought myself 2 new sweaters in colors that made me smile, a soft lavender and a deep forest green. Nothing expensive, nothing extravagant, but choosing them for myself felt like a revolutionary act. The young woman who lived in the apartment below me, Maria, began checking on me daily. Not because anyone asked her to, not because she felt obligated, but because she genuinely cared. Her smile when she saw me in the hallway was worth more than all the reluctant help my own family had ever provided. "Mrs. Thompson," she would say, "you look different lately. Happier. What's your secret?" My secret was learning to value myself exactly as much as I had always valued everyone else. Have you ever noticed how the people who truly care about you don't need to be asked to show up? They just appear, like flowers after rain, because caring is natural to them. 8 months after that first no, I sit by my kitchen window watching the Manhattan skyline paint itself in shades of gold and orange as the sun sets behind the tall buildings. This same view exists every evening, but now I have time to notice it, to appreciate it, to let its beauty fill spaces that were once occupied by other people's problems. My teacup, a new one I made myself in pottery class, warms my hands as I reflect on this journey. The past feels less like chains weighing me down and more like wings I had forgotten I possessed. Those years of financial sacrifice, emotional manipulation, and one-sided love, I've come to see them not as wasted time, but as the cocoon I needed to transform into the woman I was always meant to be. My phone still sits beside me on the table, but it no longer controls my emotional state. Sometimes it rings, and sometimes I answer it. Sometimes I don't, and that's okay too. Frank passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 months ago. Despite his confusion in recent years, he squeezed my hand one last time and whispered, "Thank you for everything." His memorial service was small but filled with people who genuinely loved him. Michael and Sarah came, of course, and for a few hours, we existed in the same space without conflict. Grief has a way of putting things in perspective. But even in loss, I maintained my boundaries. When Sarah suggested I move in with her so we can keep an eye on you, I thanked her and declined. When Michael offered to help manage Frank's insurance money, I smiled and told him I had it handled. Because I do have it handled. For the first time in my adult life, I have my own life completely handled. Mrs. Rivera and I have become inseparable friends. We take the subway into Manhattan once a week to visit museums, try new restaurants, or simply walk through Central Park pointing out dogs that make us smile. Last month, we took a weekend trip to the Finger Lakes region, something neither of us had ever done purely for pleasure. "Eleanor," she said as we sat on the porch of our bed and breakfast, watching the sun set over the water, "look what happened when you stopped trying to fix everyone else's life." She was right. When I stopped pouring all my energy into other people's emergencies, I discovered I had enough left over to build something beautiful for myself. My pottery has improved dramatically. I've made bowls, vases, and even a set of small sculptures that Dorothy says are good enough to display in a local gallery. The act of creation, of making something beautiful that exists simply because I wanted it to exist, has become a form of meditation, a way of honoring the creative spirit I had buried under decades of service to others. Do you know what I've learned about love in these past months? Real love doesn't drain you. Real love doesn't demand that you make yourself smaller so others can feel bigger. Real love doesn't come with a price tag or a payment plan. Real love feels like coming home to yourself. My relationship with my children has evolved into something I never expected: honesty. Michael calls now sometimes. Not for money, but to talk. He's started therapy with Jessica, working through the patterns that led them to see his mother as a resource rather than a person. He apologized, truly apologized, for the first time in his adult life. "Mom," he said during one of these new conversations, "I don't think I ever really saw you as a complete person. You were just Mom. Always there. Always willing to help. Always saying yes. I never thought about what you wanted or needed." Sarah has been slower to come around, but last week she sent me a text that simply said, "I'm proud of you for taking care of yourself." I should have said that a long time ago. I don't know what the future holds for these relationships. They may deepen into something more genuine, or they may remain cordial but distant. What I do know is that my happiness no longer depends on their choices. My worth is not determined by their approval or disapproval. This is perhaps the greatest gift of this entire experience. Learning that I am enough, exactly as I am, without needing to prove it to anyone else. As I finish this story, watching night fall over Brooklyn while the city lights begin to twinkle like earthbound stars, I want you to know something. If you've recognized yourself in any part of this journey, if you felt that familiar ache of giving more than you receive, of being valued only for what you provide rather than who you are, please know that it's never too late to change the story. You are not selfish for wanting to be treated with respect. You are not cruel for having boundaries. You are not ungrateful for expecting gratitude. You are not too old, too set in your ways, or too dependent on others to start living for yourself. Life taught me that love cannot be bought, only earned with respect and truth. Real relationships survive honesty and boundaries. The ones that don't survive weren't really relationships at all. They were transactions disguised as family bonds. I spent 73 years learning this lesson, but maybe you don't have to wait that long. But there's more to this story, more lessons that life had in store for me even after I thought I had learned everything I needed to know about love, family, and self-worth. 6 months after Frank's funeral, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from someone I hadn't heard from in over 2 decades, my youngest sister Patricia, whom we had always called Patty. She lived in Oregon now, had moved there with her husband after their children grew up, seeking the quiet life that comes with pine trees and mountain air. "Eleanor," she said, her voice carrying the weight of years and regret. "I heard about Frank. I should have called sooner. I should have called years ago." We talked for 3 hours that evening. Patty told me how she had watched from a distance as I gave everything to my children, how she had wanted to say something but felt it wasn't her place. She spoke about her own marriage, which had ended 5 years earlier when her husband left her for someone 20 years younger. She talked about the loneliness of starting over at 68, the terror and the unexpected joy of discovering who she was when she wasn't trying to be what everyone else needed her to be. "You know what I learned during my divorce?" she asked me. "I learned that the people who truly love you don't make you feel guilty for existing. They don't make you apologize for having needs of your own." Her words struck me with their simple truth. How many years had I spent apologizing for wanting acknowledgement? How many times had I minimized my own needs to make room for everyone else's demands? That conversation with Patty opened a door I didn't even know existed. She invited me to visit her in Oregon, and for the first time in my adult life, I said yes to something that was purely for my own happiness, without considering whether anyone else would approve or be inconvenienced by my choice. The flight to Portland was my first time on an airplane in over 30 years. As the plane lifted off from JFK Airport, I pressed my face to the small window and watched Brooklyn shrink below me until it looked like a child's toy city, complete and contained. Something about that perspective, seeing the place where I had lived my entire life suddenly small and manageable, shifted something fundamental inside me. Oregon was a revelation. Patty lived in a small town called Sisters, surrounded by mountains that made me feel both tiny and infinite at the same time. Her house was modest but filled with light, windows facing in every direction so that the sun moved through the rooms like a gentle dance partner throughout the day. "I never knew you could live somewhere this quiet," I told her as we sat on her back deck, watching deer graze in the meadow behind her house. "Quiet is different from lonely," she replied, pouring us each another cup of the strong coffee that seemed to be a requirement for mountain living. I spent too many years confusing the two. During that 2-week visit, I discovered parts of myself that had been buried under decades of being needed by others. Patty took me hiking, gentle trails suitable for elderly women with arthritic joints, but still challenging enough to make me feel accomplished when we reached each small summit. The physical exertion, the clean mountain air filling my lungs, the sense of moving through the world under my own power. It all felt like remembering a language I had forgotten I could speak. We visited art galleries in Bend, small spaces filled with local artists' work that seemed to capture the enormous sky and the way light moved differently in the high desert. I found myself lingering in front of a painting of an older woman sitting alone by a window, her face turned toward the light, her expression peaceful and complete. "That's how you look now," Patty said, coming to stand beside me. "Like you're enough all by yourself." I bought that painting. It was expensive, more than I would have spent on myself in the past, but I bought it because it reminded me of who I was becoming. When I got back to Brooklyn, I hung it in my living room where the old family photos used to be, those images of forced smiles and hollow celebrations that I had finally packed away for good. But the real transformation from that Oregon trip wasn't about the mountains or the art, or even the peace I found in my sister's quiet life. It was about what happened when I returned home. Maria, my young neighbor, greeted me in the hallway with genuine excitement. "Mrs. Thompson, you look like you've been somewhere wonderful. Tell me everything." As I described the mountains, the art galleries, the simple pleasure of eating breakfast while watching deer in a meadow, I realized something profound. I had spent 2 weeks having adventures worth sharing. For the first time in years, someone was asking about my life, not because they needed something from me, but because they were genuinely interested in my experiences. Mrs. Rivera knocked on my door that evening with a pot of coffee and an expectant smile. "Eleanor, mi amor, you look different. Oregon agreed with you, yes?" We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had once calculated how much money I had given away over the years. And now I was calculating something entirely different. How much life I had left to live, and how I wanted to spend it. "I want to do more traveling," I told her. "Small trips, nothing elaborate, but I want to see places I've never seen before." "Y por qué no?" she said, her eyes lighting up. "Why not? We're not dead yet, Mamacita. We have time." That conversation led to our first real adventure together. Mrs. Rivera had always wanted to see Washington, D.C., particularly the Smithsonian museums. I had lived my entire life just 4 hours away by train and had never visited our nation's capital. We planned the trip like teenagers planning a rebellion, researching hotels, making lists of museums to visit, even buying new walking shoes for all the exploring we intended to do. The trip was everything we hoped it would be and more. Standing in the National Gallery of Art, surrounded by paintings I had only ever seen in books, I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood. Pure wonder. Mrs. Rivera and I wandered through the Museum of Natural History like excited children, marveling at dinosaur bones and meteorites, our laughter echoing in the vast halls. But the moment that changed everything happened on our last day at the Holocaust Memorial Museum. As we walked through the exhibits documenting one of humanity's darkest chapters, I found myself thinking about different kinds of survival, about the people who had lived through unimaginable horror and still found ways to build meaningful lives afterward, about resilience, about starting over, about the courage it takes to choose hope when hope seems impossible. In one exhibit, there was a quote from a survivor that stopped me in my tracks. "The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. And the opposite of life is not death, it's not living fully while you're alive." I stood in front of that quote for a long time, Mrs. Rivera's gentle hand on my arm. Both of us understanding that we were witnessing something sacred, not just the history preserved in that museum, but the moment when my own life shifted into a new phase entirely. On the train ride back to New York, I made a decision that surprised me with its clarity and certainty. I was going to sell my Brooklyn apartment and move somewhere I could afford to live more fully. Not to Oregon. Patty's life was beautiful, but it was her life, not mine. I needed to create something entirely my own. "Are you sure?" Mrs. Rivera asked when I told her my plan. "This has been your home for so long." "No," I said, looking out the train window at the landscape rushing past us. "This has been where I lived while I was taking care of everyone else. I want to find out where I live when I'm taking care of myself." The process of selling the apartment was both heartbreaking and liberating. Each room held decades of memories. Michael's first steps in the living room, Sarah's high school graduation party in the kitchen, nights spent holding Frank's hand while he recovered from his stroke. But mixed in with those precious memories were others. The arguments about money, the resentful silences, the feeling of being invisible in my own home. My realtor, a sharp young woman named Carmen who reminded me of how Sarah might have been if she had learned to be kind, told me the apartment was worth far more than I had expected. The Brooklyn neighborhood I had watched slowly improve over the decades had become desirable, attracting young families who were willing to pay premium prices for the character and convenience I had taken for granted. "Mrs. Thompson," Carmen said as we reviewed the offers, "you could buy a nice house almost anywhere in the country with what this place will bring. Have you thought about where you want to go?" I had thought about it. I had spent weeks researching small cities with good health care, cultural opportunities, and cost of living that would allow me to stretch my money into a comfortable future. I had narrowed it down to 3 possibilities: Asheville, North Carolina, with its mountains and thriving art scene; Savannah, Georgia, with its historic charm and mild winters; and Santa Fe, New Mexico, with its high desert beauty and vibrant community of artists and writers. But it was Mrs. Rivera who helped me make the final decision. "Eleanor," she said one evening as we sat in her kitchen sharing a dinner of her famous rice and beans, "remember what you said about wanting to live fully? Think about which place makes you feel most like the woman you're becoming, not the woman you've always been." Santa Fe kept calling to me. Something about the vast skies, the way the light was supposed to be different there, the idea of living somewhere that felt as expansive as my newfound freedom. When I told Dorothy from my pottery class about my plans, her face lit up with excitement. "Oh, honey, Santa Fe is magical for artists. The clay work you could do there, the inspiration you'd find. It would be like giving birth to a whole new version of yourself." The decision felt right in my bones, in the same deep place where I had finally learned to trust my instincts about people and relationships. But before I could start over somewhere new, I had to have one final conversation with my children. Not to ask their permission, those days were over, but to tell them my truth, with a capital T. The whole truth about what their treatment of me had done, what I had learned about myself in the process of recovering from it, and what I expected from them going forward if they wanted to maintain a relationship with me. I arranged to meet Sarah and Michael at a neutral location, a small cafe in Manhattan that served excellent coffee, and had enough ambient noise to make private conversation possible without feeling intimate. I didn't want to meet in my apartment, where they might feel they had the upper hand due to familiarity, and I didn't want to go to either of their homes, where I might be tempted to fall back into old patterns of accommodating their comfort over my own clarity. They arrived separately. Sarah 15 minutes early, looking nervous and defensive; Michael exactly on time with Jessica, both of them wearing expressions that suggested they expected an ambush. I had beaten them all there by 30 minutes, wanting to choose my seat, order my coffee, and settle into my own sense of calm before the confrontation began. "Mom," Sarah started before she had even fully sat down, "if this is about money again—" "Stop," I said quietly, but with enough firmness that she actually did stop talking. "For once in this relationship, I'm going to talk first, and you're going to listen. You can have your turn when I'm finished." The look of surprise on their faces told me everything I needed to know about how I had trained them to treat me over the years. They had never heard me claim conversational space before, had never seen me prioritize my need to be heard over their need to be comfortable. I told them everything. About the years of financial sacrifice that had left me struggling in my old age while they lived comfortably. About the pattern of emotional manipulation that had made me feel guilty for wanting basic acknowledgement and respect. About overhearing Jessica's cruel assessment of me as their personal ATM. About the hospital stay where none of them visited, and how Mrs. Rivera, a woman who owed me nothing, had shown me more genuine care than my own flesh and blood. But I also told them about my awakening, about learning to say no, about discovering pottery and friendship and travel and all the ways life could be rich and meaningful when you stopped pouring yourself out for people who only valued what you could provide. About moving to Santa Fe, about choosing adventure over safety, about finally learning to love myself as much as I had always loved them. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you," I said as their faces moved through expressions of shock, guilt, and something that might have been shame. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand who I'm becoming, and what our relationship will look like going forward if we're going to have one at all." Michael was the first to speak, his voice smaller than I had heard it since he was a child. "Mom, I had no idea. I mean, I knew you were always there for us, but I never thought about what it was costing you." "That's the problem," I replied. "You never thought about it. None of you did." You just took and took until there was nothing left of me but what I could give you." Jessica, to her credit, looked directly at me when she spoke. "Mrs. Thompson, what I said that day, about you being like an ATM, that was cruel and wrong. I was showing off, trying to sound smart, and I didn't think about how it would sound or what it really meant about how we were treating you." It was the first genuine apology I had ever received from her, and while it didn't erase the hurt, it felt like a beginning. Sarah was crying, which surprised me. My daughter had always prided herself on being tough, unemotional, practical to a fault. "Mom, I don't want to lose you. I can't imagine my life without you in it." "Then don't lose me," I said simply. "But understand that the me you're going to have in your life from now on is different from the me you've known. I have boundaries now. I have my own life, my own plans, my own dreams. I will be your mother until the day I die, but I will not be your bank account, your therapist, or your emotional safety net. You're all adults. It's time you learned to act like it." The conversation lasted 3 hours. There were tears, arguments, moments of understanding, and long stretches of uncomfortable silence as we all adjusted to this new dynamic, where my needs and feelings were given equal weight with theirs. By the end, we had reached something that felt like a tentative peace, not the warm, fuzzy reconciliation you see in movies, but a realistic understanding of what our relationships could become if we all committed to treating each other with genuine respect and honesty. Michael promised to start paying back the money he had borrowed over the years, not all at once, but in monthly installments that wouldn't strain his budget but would acknowledge the debt. More importantly, he committed to regular phone calls with no underlying agenda, conversations where he asked about my life, my pottery, my travels, my feelings. Sarah agreed to stop making assumptions about my financial obligations to the family and to start including me in decisions about holidays and gatherings, instead of just expecting me to show up when convenient and stay away when not needed. Jessica promised to think before she spoke about me to others, and to make an effort to see me as a whole person rather than just Michael's overly generous mother. And I promised to be honest about my needs and boundaries, instead of expecting them to read my mind, and to give them genuine chances to prove they could change instead of writing them off based on past behavior. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real felt like a solid foundation to build on, even if the building would take time and patience from all of us. 3 months later, I stood in the living room of my new adobe house in Santa Fe, looking out through large windows at the Sandia Mountains in the distance, their peaks purple in the late afternoon light. Mrs. Rivera had come out for my housewarming week, and we were unpacking the last boxes of my belongings, deciding where everything should go in this new space that was entirely mine. "Eleanor," she said, holding up the painting I had bought in Oregon, the one of the older woman sitting peacefully by a window. "Where do you want this?" I looked around the room, at the southwestern furniture I had chosen because I loved its clean lines and warm colors, at the pottery wheel I had bought myself as a moving-in gift, at the built-in shelves waiting to hold books I planned to read, and ceramic pieces I planned to create. "Right there," I said, pointing to the wall opposite my favorite chair, the spot where I would see it every morning when I sat to drink my coffee and plan my day. I want it where I can see it whenever I need to remember who I am now. Mrs. Rivera hung the picture carefully, stepping back to make sure it was level and properly positioned. As she did, the late afternoon light streaming through my windows seemed to illuminate the painted woman's face, making her expression even more serene and self-contained. "Perfecto," Mrs. Rivera said, but she wasn't just talking about the painting's placement. That evening, as we sat on my new back patio watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Michael's name, and for just a moment, I felt that old familiar flutter of anxiety. But then I remembered where I was, who I had become, and what our new relationship was supposed to look like. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, answering the phone with genuine warmth instead of defensive wariness. "Hi, Mom. I'm not calling because I need anything," he said quickly, and I could hear him trying out these new patterns of interaction. I just wanted to see how you're settling in. Sarah said you sent pictures of your house and it looks amazing. We talked for 20 minutes about my new neighborhood, the pottery studio I had found, the hiking trails Mrs. Rivera and I were planning to explore. He told me about a book he was reading, a new recipe Jessica had discovered, a funny thing that had happened at his job. Normal conversation between two adults who cared about each other, with no undercurrents of need or resentment or obligation. When I hung up, Mrs. Rivera raised her coffee mug in a toast. To new beginnings, mi amor, and to old friendships that make them possible. As the stars began to appear in the vast New Mexico sky, more stars than I had ever seen from my Brooklyn apartment, I thought about all the people who had helped me find my way to this moment. Mrs. Rivera with her honesty and loyalty, Dorothy from pottery class with her encouragement to create, Ms. Chen, the lawyer with her practical guidance, Patricia, my sister, with her mountain wisdom, Carmen, the realtor who had seen the potential in what I was leaving behind. Even the hospital nurse Patricia, who had planted the first seed about family being about who shows up rather than who shares your blood. But most of all, I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, frightened, depleted, invisible in her own life, and the woman I had become. Not different exactly, but more myself than I had ever allowed myself to be. The next morning, I woke to mountain light streaming through bedroom windows I had chosen specifically because they faced east. I made coffee in a kitchen designed around my needs and preferences, not anyone else's. I ate breakfast on dishes I had made with my own hands. I planned a day that would unfold according to my desires, my energy level, my sense of what would bring me joy and satisfaction. And for the first time in my 74 years of life, I understood what it meant to be completely, authentically, unapologetically myself. Have you ever lived something like this? Or known someone who has? Have you ever felt like a bank account with a heartbeat? Valued more for what you could provide than for who you are as a person? Your stories matter, and sharing them helps all of us feel less alone in our struggles. Please, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences, your wisdom, your journey toward self-respect. They all contribute to a conversation that desperately needs to happen. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that you deserve respect and genuine love, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. When you do, you're not just supporting my ability to share these stories, you're helping ensure that someone else who needs to hear this message will find it when they need it most. Together, we're stronger than we ever imagined. Together, we can rewrite the stories that no longer serve us. Together, we can learn that it's never too late to choose ourselves. Thank you for listening to my heart. Thank you for opening yours in return.